The miracle that shocked history and proved the Eucharist is real. War is the cruelest face of humanity. Wherever there is war, there is death, destruction, and hatred. In times of violence, faith is put to the test, and hearts grow cold. Yet, sometimes, in the midst of horror, something extraordinary happens. A moment that defies reason, a sign that shakes the soul. Today, we will tell you a story so incredible that it continues to move hearts centuries later. This is not just a historical event, it is a powerful testimony that confirms the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. But to understand this miracle, we must travel back to the year 1572, to a small town called Gorkum, in what we now know as the Netherlands. A time of war and persecution. During this period, Europe was engulfed in a violent religious conflict. Catholics and Protestants were divided, and churches became battlegrounds. Priests were hunted down, and Catholicism faced extinction in some regions. One of the most feared groups at that time was a band of mercenaries known as the Sea Beggars. These ruthless soldiers were determined to erase every trace of Catholicism. Their cruelty knew no bounds. When they arrived in Gorkum, they had one goal: to destroy the faith. Their first target? The town's main church. The sacrilege begins. The church doors were smashed open with brute force. Laughter and shouts of mockery echoed through the sacred halls. The priest and a few faithful tried to stop them, but they were outnumbered and defenseless. The soldiers stormed inside, shoving aside anyone who stood in their way. They dragged people out of the church and turned their attention to the altar, the heart of the Catholic faith. There, in the sacred tabernacle, was the Eucharist, the Blessed Sacrament, the real presence of Christ in the form of consecrated hosts. For the soldiers, it was nothing more than pieces of bread. With sneers of contempt, they seized the golden chalice and threw the hosts onto the cold stone floor. One of them, laughing, lifted his boot and stomped on them with force. The others joined in, grinding the sacred hosts beneath their feet. They believed they were proving that God was powerless. The unexplainable happened suddenly. A deep silence fell over the church. The laughter stopped. The soldiers looked at the floor, their faces growing pale. Something terrifying was happening. The consecrated hosts were bleeding. At first, just a drop. Then another. And within moments, a thick red liquid flowed from the crushed Eucharist. The soldiers froze in horror. The blood was real. It was undeniable. It spread across the floor, staining their boots. Some took a step back, murmuring curses. Others instinctively made the sign of the cross, their arrogance fading into fear. One of them fell to his knees, trembling. "This is impossible," someone whispered. But the blood kept flowing. It was as if Christ himself was weeping from the desecrated altar. Fear grips the soldiers. The men who had laughed moments before now stood in stunned silence. Their faces were drained of color. Their hands shook. One soldier, desperate to escape, turned and ran out of the church. Another fell to the ground, clutching his head. "This can't be happening," he cried. But the worst was yet to come. Instead of repenting, some of them reacted with blind rage. Their pride could not accept what they had just witnessed. "This is a trick," one of them shouted. Another, furious, drew his sword and slashed at the altar, knocking down candles and sacred relics. Their anger only deepened their downfall. What followed sealed their fate forever. The hunt for the priests. The soldiers could not allow news of the miracle to spread. They needed to erase all evidence and silence anyone who had seen it. The order was given: find the priests and eliminate them. Like wolves hunting prey, they stormed through the town. They banged on doors, dragged people from their homes, and demanded answers. But the people of Gorkum remained silent, refusing to betray the servants of God. Infuriated, the soldiers resorted to cruelty. They burned houses, beat the elderly, and threatened children. Finally, they found the Franciscan friars. Among them was Father Nicholas Peak, a man of unshakable faith. When the soldiers burst into his convent, he simply smiled and said, "If it is my time, let it be for God's glory." The march to martyrdom. The 19 priests and religious men were bound with ropes and forced to march through the streets like criminals. The soldiers mocked them, kicked them, and spat at them. But something incredible happened. Instead of crying out in fear, the priests began to pray. Their whispered prayers grew louder until they became a chant. "Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name." The soldiers hesitated. They didn't understand. How could these men still praise God while walking toward death? One soldier, irritated, punched Father Jerome in the face. "Your God won't save you now," he sneered. The friar, his face bloodied, looked at him with pity. "My God has already saved me," he said. "Who will save your soul?" For the first time, the fear shifted. The final sacrifice, the prisoners were thrown into a cold, dark cellar. There, they were tortured for days. They were beaten, starved, and threatened with the worst pain imaginable. Then, the ultimate test came. The desecrated hosts were brought before them. "Spit on them, trample them, and we will let you live," the soldier whispered. One by one, the priests knelt and kissed the Eucharist instead. Father Leonard van Vegel, with trembling hands and bloodied fingers, took a host and whispered, "Lord, I am not worthy that you should enter under my roof, but only say the word, and my soul shall be healed." Then, he consumed it. The room fell silent. The soldiers couldn't believe what they had just seen. The death sentence was pronounced. The martyr's last words at dawn, the soldiers came for them. The friars stood up, exhausted but unafraid. They were led to an old barn outside the city, where a wooden gallows stood. "This is your last chance," the captain said. "Deny your faith, and you will live." Father Nicholas Peake smiled. "I have spent my life preaching that Christ is truly present in the Eucharist. I will not deny him now." One by one, they were hanged. Their last words were prayers. Their faces showed no fear, only peace. The legacy of the martyrs: when Catholics returned to Gorkum, they turned the execution site into a shrine. In 1867, Pope Pius IX canonized the 19 martyrs. Their story remains a powerful testimony that the Eucharist is real. That faith is stronger than death. That the truth cannot be silenced. Even today, this miracle challenges us to ask, do we truly believe? If this story impacted you, share it. Let the world know that Christ is alive in the Eucharist.